whenever I think about like the setting boundaries with parents, I always think about my youngest kid because I still remember like he was the one who taught me that I had no control over my kids. And he did this when he was like 2 years old. And I still remember this. I can clearly see it. He may have barely been two, also. He may have been like 18 months. And I was giving him some green beans, and he did not want to eat these green beans. And so, like, he ended up throwing them on the floor. And so I was like, no, you have to pick those up. And so I was trying to get him to pick them up, and he would not pick these green beans up. And we had like a 2 hour standoff trying to get him to pick these green beans up. And I mean, like, I would put his hand over them, put my hand on top, and like hold on to them and lift it up. And as soon as I let go, he let go too. And I was like, I have no control over this boy. And it's like it was then like he set that boundary of I'm not eating these green beans, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And there was nothing that I could do about it. And to this day, he's almost 13 years old. He still refuses to eat green beans, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so I love that he was able to kind of like set that. And it's like, no, this is my boundary. I'm going to uphold it, and I'm not going to allow you to kind of cross my boundary and force me to eat these green beans. And so whenever I think about like clients and they'll be like adults. I work with mostly adults, and they're talking about their adult parent, and it's like I can't set a boundary with them. And I was like, my 2 year old set a boundary with me. And so it's so funny because I always think about that. But I think there's so much that goes into like setting boundaries, with parents when you're thinking about like how you were raised and the trauma and the culture and all those types of things that kind of play into like the difficulty that people have with being able to set boundaries because they weren't allowed to set boundaries. Luckily, my kid has a mom who was a therapist, and so I understood the importance of being able to set boundaries for themselves, even though it was annoying.
For sure. Yeah, because a lot of the clients I talk to, they don't even have the permission or the autonomy to even know that they're able to set boundaries. And then once they become adults, when they do try to set boundaries with parents, they'll say, like, oh, I feel guilty or I feel um, shame for, setting this boundary. Like, what if I'm being disrespectful? That's also like a cultural thing, too. And it's like, boundaries aren't necessarily disrespectful, but if you have a parent where they're not open minded or growing with you, or like respecting what you're saying, then it can be really difficult, communicating those boundaries.
Mm. And I think sometimes it's more of like clarifying what a boundary can look like with parents, and it may be like you're not going to allow them to talk to you in that way. And it's not that you're going to get into an argument with them or cuss them out. You're going to be like, you know what, mom, I don't like what the direction the conversation has taken, and so I'm going to call you back tomorrow. Okay, goodbye, hang up. And so that's setting the boundary of you can't talk to me any kind of way. And so I'm not saying it like that. You can't talk to me any kind of way, because what's that going to do is create an argument. What I'm going to say is I don't like this tone of voice, and I'm going to call you back tomorrow. When we both had time to kind of reflect and regroup ourselves. And so boundaries don't have to go into the realm of being disrespectful. We're not cussing out and hanging up mom. That's not a boundary.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really important for clients to kind of explore, like, what are the type of boundaries that you want to put in place with parents? Like, I know culturally, some of my clients, they've dealt with their parents talking about their bodies all their lives, or you should look like this, or you should look like that. And then you become an adult and, communicating, like, hey, I don't like when you talk about my body, and like thinking about ways to kind of put up those boundaries because eventually, like, it affects their mental health in a negative way.
Hmm. Especially, I think it's interesting when the client is having a hard time, and it's like you don't even live in the house with your parent anymore. You don't live in the house. You don't live in the same state, and it's like it's so much easier for you to set those boundaries. But they're so conditioned to be like, no, you can't say these things. I do think it's different when you are living with a parent, or the parent is like supporting you financially or things like that. It becomes a little bit harder to kind of set those boundaries because you then have to like you risk like losing all the things that you need to kind of be alive. And so then it becomes what are the boundaries? How can these boundaries look in a way that's still kind of going to keep a roof over your head?
For sure, for sure. Because when I'm talking to clients, especially like the young adults, I'm thinking like, are you living at home? Are you not living at home? Do you depend on, your parents financially? Because sometimes it comes down to parents want your values or your life to look like one way, and you as a young adult choosing something else that could end up making someone be homeless or disowned. Also think about like unlearning like enmeshment. Like that can be really tough too. It's like the expectations that your parents have for you. Like, hey, every Sunday we're going to go to church, or, your aunt needs you to help them, kind of like pulling you in all these directions. But, you know, why is it that your parents get to, you know, tell you how to live your life essentially? And then clients are trying to figure that out. So I think trying to create boundaries when you're very enmeshed or connected with your family can be really tough too.
Yeah. It makes me think about the struggle that a lot of people have with like when it's financial and it's like, oh, well, my mom thinks that I should help with this, or I should be helping my sister or my brother, or because I have a good job, I should be giving to the rest of the family. And sometimes like there's a lot of guilt associated with like, oh, I didn't help out my mom and now her lights are going to be turned off, or I didn't help out my brother and now, he can't pay his tuition or things like that. And so a lot of times there's, guilt wrapped up in the like, if I set this boundary, now I'm going to feel bad about not helping them out.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you bring up a good point because I notice a lot of times, sometimes with some of my clients, they're in multiple roles. Not only the role of the adult child, but they're in the role of the provider or taking care of finances. But if they do have that role, then they may not also have the role to speak up or establish healthy boundaries or be able to have their emotions in a safe place. And I think that's where a lot of the resistance comes because it's like, how am I financially supporting parents, but I'm not actually able to act like an adult or speak like an adult.
Mhm. And that's one of the things that I'll that's one of the things that I would tell people is that you have to remember what your roles are. And so if their mom or their sister or their brother and your child or sibling, it's like, who are you in those roles? What is that person supposed to be doing? So is the child supposed to be paying all the bills? Is the child supposed to be parenting the younger siblings? And it's like, no. So remember what your role is. You act out of that. And of course, that's difficult for a lot of people. But I'm like, your life will be so much, calmer when you're operating in the role that you're intended to operate in.
For sure. And I think that role of when the adult child kind of outgrows the immature parent, I think that could be really tough too because it's like a role reversal, but
Hmm.
it's like much more like a parent. Like you can actually physically see it. Like no longer is that child 13, they're 30 years old and let them have a family or kids. It can be tough for kids or adult kids to continue to be there for their parents. So somebody talked to me about they feel like they're in the role of a daughter, a therapist for their mother, a support system, a partner. They felt like they were so many roles for their mother, and they just didn't know how to detach from that.
Yeah. And one thing I think that kind of comes into to play, like as a therapist, is being able to help people identify what those roles look like. And I always think about like things that I tell people, and it's like, this isn't going to happen because you did this, or this isn't going to take place because they did that. And so being able to kind of clearly identify, like, or to look at what they fear is going to happen, and if those things will happen or not happen based on them being able to set those boundaries. And so it's like, yeah, this you're operating with this like immature parent. It's like, well, if I don't help them out, then they're going to be on the streets. And it's like, is that the reality of it? Or will they figure it out when they're forced to figure it out? And so I think a lot of times people are like, no, if I don't take care of them, they're just going to fall apart. And it's like, you haven't been around their whole life. They have figured it out, or they have found somebody to figure it out for them, but you're just like the easy target now.
For sure, because sometimes I feel like with adult children, they will take on their parents' work and they're not letting them figure it out. They're not letting them use their critical thinking skills or letting them like, fall down and bump their knee or scratch their knee. And I think that that's really important because if an adult child is taking on that burden, how is that taking away from the adult child? And how is that taking away from the emotionally immature parent? Like, kind
You
of
are
take,
enabling their behavior.
yeah, it takes away their ability to grow and learn and how to do those things that the adult child actually wants them to do.
Mhm. Especially when I think about it when it's like we're talking about like an adult child, say like early 20s, and their parents are like early 40s, maybe early 50s, somewhere around there. And it's like your parents are still in the position where they can learn how to take care of themselves. It would be different if your parent was like 80 with dementia or something like that. Yeah, we kind of have different roles then because they probably need some assistance. But when they're at an age where they can still kind of learn and take care of themselves and grow, you don't want to enable or stunt their development.
Mhm. Yeah. I also think in talking about boundaries with parents is really important for adult children to kind of self-reflect on their expectations of their parents, and when they think about those expectations, like what are the capacities or what's in the toolbox of the actual parent.
Mhm.
Because we could be establishing healthy boundaries or trying to establish boundaries with someone that is not able to respect that, or it's just too harsh.
Yeah. Whenever I think about like the expectations that people have of their parents, I always use the same phrase of "You're never gonna bake cookies with your mom." And they're like, "What?" And I was like, the idea that you have of what this relationship is gonna look like, it's not gonna happen. So no matter how much money you give, how much attention you give, how much like you've been to everything that they want you to, it's never gonna have that expectation because they have to change as a person in order for them to be able to align with your expectations. But as long as you're enabling them, as long as you're just doing everything that they request, they're never going to change as a person. So you're never going to bake cookies with your mom.
I love that analogy because I feel like for some of my adult clients that are adult clients to parents like that, I feel like they have this want or need to connect with their parents emotionally. And I find that a lot of times they overextend and overreach, and that it really creates like a lot of resentment, because their parents aren't able to love them the way that they want to be loved. Because I think with adult kids, that's one thing they notice is like, oh,
Mhm.
I really need this from my parent now. And you're not 8 years old anymore, you're not 10 years old, and maybe your parent isn't able to give you what you need as an adult child.
Mhm. It makes me think about this. I think it was probably I was scrolling through like a Facebook therapist group, and there was like an article or something, and it was talking about how um, these new therapists or these therapists nowadays are making everybody go no contact with their parents. And it's like, we're not making anybody go no contact. I was like, what we're doing is that we're highlighting the behaviors of their parents and telling them that they have options to be able to set boundaries. And if that looks like no contact or reduced contact, then that's what it looks like.
For sure. I literally made a post about Mother's Day and the mother's wound, and just kind of like speaking to clients that are either no contact or have like challenging relationships with their moms. And I had someone comment that, oh, great, job security. You're just trying to keep your job and, split up families. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I was just amazed that someone could read it like that. But obviously, they have their
Their
own.
kid is probably no contact with them.
Yeah, they probably have their own wounds to deal with. And, I replied back and I'm like, my intentions is to support my client in the way that they need me to support it.
Mhm.
Because we don't know the stories of people. We don't know if mothers or parents are being verbally, physically abusive, or we don't know what's going on. And only the client, the expert of their experiences, can, let me know what they've experienced and what they want to do with their lives.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of like the work that I've done with interns, and I've had some of them with that belief set of like, oh, but that's your mom. And I was like, don't ever say that to a client. I'm like, you don't know the extent of what that relationship may have been like. Even as a therapist, our clients don't tell us everything.
Yep.
And it's like a lot of things may be like omitted because they're not ready to talk about it yet. And it's like, don't ever say, oh, because that's your parent. Just because it's your parent does not mean that they get like that you should just forgive them over and over and over again. one of the things that I always say to clients whenever it's like a mommy daddy issue or sibling issue, and I always say, if you are not related to them, would y'all be friends? And they'd be like, no. And then it's like, okay, that tells you a lot.
Exactly, exactly. Mhm.
And so many people have like, they're like, oh yeah, I really resonate with that. And I've had clients come back and they say like, I always remember when you say that. And whenever I'm looking at people and it's like, if this person wasn't my mom or this person wasn't my dad, would I want to have a relationship with them? And that says a lot in terms of like setting a boundary. So if you want them in your life just because they do have that title, then it's like, how do you keep yourself safe so that you're not spending all this money in therapy talking to me about this parent?
Yeah, for sure. It makes me think about like when you're at work and you get like a performance review and they tell you like your strengths and your weaknesses. And I think it's tough when children don't, and they essentially give parents a performance review.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's like what I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like if your kids are still talking to you after they're outside of your house, that means that you probably did a good job as a parent.
Mhm.
And so it's
Yeah.
just that reflection of they haven't cut you off, they haven't set these hardcore boundaries. So you must have had done something correctly at some point in your parenting that they still want to have a relationship with you when they don't have to.
Yeah, because I think it's really important, with parents and adult children that the parent is still like essentially the guide, right? So it's like with that being in that role of the guide, it's like you still have to get to know your adult child. You still have to be
Mhm.
interested in what they're talking about and thinking about ways of like how can I support you better? Like literally asking them. And I think it's really tough for some parents to grow with their adult children because they may see them in that role as a child. But then I think that just causes more disconnection because you don't know their favorite song or what they have going on in college. And I think, if it just takes a little bit of self awareness and being intentional. And a lot of parents wouldn't be no contact with their kids because it's not what they really did in the past. It's the fact that the parent continues to
Mhm.
do the things into the kid's adulthood.
Yeah, I also think about other ways that like the relationships shifts, and it's like you have this child and it goes into adulthood, and so you don't see them as an adult, or it's like now you see them as a friend, and it's like, oh, I don't have to parent anymore. You're a friend, and it's like, no, your role will always remain as parent until you're to a point where you're like maybe with like dementia or something like that, and then the roles like really reverse because of like medical reasons, but otherwise you're still the parent. And you kind of have to remember like what that role is as a parent, what it looks like as a parent. One of the things I always tell my kids like about their fathers, I was like, y'all, your father is responsible for maintaining contact with you. They are the adult, they are the parent. It's not your responsibility to maintain contact. And even with my dad, I think about it the same way, and it's like he has my phone number. If he wants to maintain a relationship with me, he'll reach out to me, and he does. I talk to my dad all the time. um, but it's very much of making sure that you remember that you're the parent. You brought this kid into this world, or even our clients when we're talking about their parent, they're your parent. They brought you into this world. They hold the same responsibilities, that they've always been held. Now, of course, they're not having to change diapers and feed you and those types of things, so it shifts. But they're still supposed to be like that guide. They're their parent.
For sure. And I think you really highlight a really good point. And I think a lot of parents either don't take this into account or don't consider it, but it's like it is the parent's responsibility to cultivate that relationship with their child, no matter how old or young they are. And I was just listening to a post from a therapist, and she was talking about how she works a lot with like the boomer parents and how the boomer parents are getting the no contact or, strict boundaries, and they just feel like the victim. And she was like, I just want to highlight, what they've been through. And it's like, you know, I mean, I feel like they've had enough space and time to kind of go through what they've gone through and like, maybe they can handle that in therapy, but there's no excuse that if you've been through stuff that you should continue that cycle with your kids
Mhm.
because it just creates more direction, more disconnection, and it honestly is like kind of saying like they're not taking accountability. Like they're like, I don't remember that, or I've been through a lot too, and I think it's just really hard because as you hear your adult kid giving you that performance review, it can be very hurtful. And, a lot of times they just get defensive.
Oh, I'm just such a bad mom.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just really important to understand, like, even if there's an adult and an adult parent, like, you are still the hierarchy, you are still the adult. So it's like, yeah, you have more responsibility
Mhm.
on your end. Yes, you still have to apologize. Yes, you still have to grow and change and learn, like, what your kids like and dislike. But the thing comes down to it is like, do you want to put in the effort to do it?
Mhm. Yeah. And most of the time people don't. But it makes me also think about how many clients I've had who will say things like, I don't want to have kids because I don't want my kids to have the same parent that I have. And I was
Mhm.
like, even your awareness of the fact that you want to be different from your parent and the fact that you're in therapy trying to be different from your parent, your kid is not going to have that same experience. The difference with you and your parent never got any help. Your parent never acknowledged it. Your parent never tried to do anything differently. And the fact that you're sitting here in front of me is you trying to do something differently.
For sure. And I think sometimes adult kids think that the healing has to come between them and their parent, or that's what their healing relies on. But the beautiful thing about being an adult child is you can reparent yourself. I try to empower a lot of my clients, like, okay, I know you're trying to heal the relationship between you and mom, and we're really not making any progress because mom is not growing. So how about we redirect this and see how we can reparent you, or focus on your inner child, or focus on, like, supporting yourself better with the things that your needs weren't met with. And I think it's just more empowering versus like waiting on someone else, like an adult parent, to change, if they're even going to change.
Mhm. Yeah. It makes me think about a conversation I had with ChatGPT, and it was talking about how I need somebody who is um, the reason why I look for somebody who's a mirror of myself is because I need somebody who's like nurturing. But it's like you also have to learn how to nurture yourself until you have somebody who can, do that for you. And so we've been on this whole like, how do I nurture myself? In the same kind of category of like, how do I parent myself? Um, because the reality is we don't know if the parent is ever going to come around to be able to be the parent that we need. And we don't want to like sit there and wait or try to change them when it's like, just focus on yourself, take care of this yourself. You can do it.
Yeah, because there's always things that you can focus on within yourself, whether it's your strengths or areas of improvement, really focusing on like what are your needs now, because our needs are always changing and growing. So we always have things that we can focus on, but I think sometimes clients get stuck and they're like, but they need to fix it. And it's like, that's like out of our control,
Yeah.
somewhat out of our control.
Yeah. And what I tell people, I was like, well, they're not here. And so I can't do anything about them. So unless they are going and getting their own work, and even in doing that, we don't know what they're talking about. And so we don't know if they're working on anything that relates to you, or if they're just sitting there using it as a vent session to complain about you. And so we have no control over anybody else. And so we don't want to, you know, put our happiness in this framework of, well, if they heal or if they get better, then I can be happy. No, doesn't work
Yeah.
that way.
One thing I ask my clients a lot, is it you who wants it more? Is it you that wants it more? Does mom or dad equally want it more? Like, who really is putting in all the effort to make this relationship work? And then they just look and they're like, I feel like it's just me. And I'm like, well, it's probably time to take a step back. Because at that point, you're going to go down this road of either burnout or compassion fatigue, or just feeling like resentful because it's like I'm putting in so much effort and they're not giving me any back.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think it's just really important to kind of like help those clients being able to kind of like set those boundaries and understand, that your healing is yours. And so would it be great for these people to change and do better and make it easier for you? Yeah, but at the end of the day, you're the only person who gets to like dictate how you heal and how you grow and how you survive in this world.
Exactly, exactly. Because it's up to us to cultivate our internal world, and because by blaming other people, especially your parents, after a certain point, you're an adult. Like, you're really
Mhm.
an adult, and it's like
What are
you
you gonna do about it?
exactly, because then it's like if your inner world is just chaotic from something that happened in third grade or fourth grade, what are we going to do to change that? We have to be able to do something different. And like you said, it doesn't rely on external sources or external people.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I tell people all the time, awareness is the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people like, oh, I'm so self-aware and all this. And it's like, okay, but what are you going to do with that self-awareness?
Yeah.
And so if you are aware that what mom did to you in the third grade, shaped the way that you view yourself or your body or whatever, what are you going to do about it? You can't sit around and wait for mom to say, I'm sorry, or no, you're beautiful. You have to do something about it.
Yeah. Because leaving your healing journey in other people's hands that may or may not even be doing their own work is definitely dangerous.
Mm-hmm. It's like when people say, oh, they stole my joy. And I'm like, no, you gave your joy away. Take it back.
Oh my gosh. I remember that someone said that to me one time. I said something like, oh my gosh, they ruined my day. And they were like, yeah, because you let them. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like home balloons. I'm like, you're so right. Like, I literally let them come into my energetic space and disrupt it.
Yeah.
And
And I tell people that all the time when they're like, what is wrong with me? I was like, you allow people to treat you like trash. That's what's wrong with you.